Helen Brooks stepped out of her car after a 15-hour drive from Phoenix, her legs stiff and her back aching, but her heart full of excitement. She hurried through the hospital entrance, clutching the small bag she'd packed for her first moment as a grandmother. When she reached the maternity hallway, she spotted her son, Michael, pacing back and forth with a tense expression. The instant his eyes met hers, his shoulders tightened. Instead of joy or relief, he looked almost startled. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, guarded, as if she had caught him unprepared. Helen blinked in confusion. "What do you mean, what am I doing here?" "Sarah called me. She said you both wanted me here for the birth." Michael looked toward the delivery room door like someone afraid it might swing open at any moment. He rubbed his hands together nervously. "She changed her mind," he murmured. "Sarah wants it to be just the two of us. No other family." Helen stared at him, stunned. "Mike, I drove 15 hours, she whispered. "I'm not trying to be in the room. I just want to be close." Michael sighed. "Mom, please. Sarah's very emotional right now." Helen studied her son's face and saw the truth. Fear of upsetting his wife, not fear for the delivery. "So you're sending me away?" she asked softly. Michael swallowed hard. "Just go to your hotel for now. I'll call you when Eli is born." Helen nodded, even though her chest felt painfully tight. Fighting right there in the hallway would only make things worse. "Fine," she whispered. She walked back toward the elevator feeling hollow, the joy drained from her long trip. Back in her hotel room, she placed her phone beside her pillow, waiting for the call that felt farther away by the minute. 8 hours later, her phone finally rang. "Mom, he's here," Michael said, his voice tired but happy. "His name is Eli. 7 pounds, 1 ounce. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart, when can I meet him?" she asked. Silence stretched on the line before Michael answered. "Maybe in a day or two. Sarah's exhausted and wants to settle in first." Helen sat on the edge of the bed, shocked. "Mike, I came all this way," she whispered. "I'm his grandmother." But Michael only sighed, sounding helpless. "Mom, please understand." Helen hung up feeling like a stranger begging for scraps of affection from her own son. 2 more days passed without a single invitation. On Friday, unable to bear the silence, Helen drove back to the hospital hoping to at least see Eli through a window. But the nurse at the desk smiled politely and said, "Oh, the Brooks family checked out this morning." Helen immediately called Michael. "You took the baby home without telling me," she demanded. "Mom, Sarah wanted to be in her own space," he replied. "She's anxious about visitors." Helen exhaled sharply. "Michael, I'm not a visitor. I'm your mother." But he repeated the same line. "Maybe next month, Mom. Please." Helen drove back to her hotel with trembling hands, trying to swallow the pain that kept rising in her throat. She had imagined holding baby Eli, imagined the weight of him in her arms, imagined the first photo she would send to her friends. Instead, she sat alone in a quiet hotel room watching the sun set behind Denver's gray buildings. After an hour of staring at her silent phone, she finally packed her bags. If Michael and Sarah didn't want her there now, hovering in a hotel room wasn't going to change anything. She checked out and began the long drive home. On Sunday afternoon, as Helen unpacked in her Phoenix kitchen, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Helen Brooks?" the caller asked. "Yes, speaking. This is billing from Denver Medical Center. We have paperwork issues regarding Sarah Brooks's delivery. The insurance claim was denied. We need to discuss payment arrangements." Helen frowned. "Payment arrangements? For what?" "The $2,300 delivery bill. Our records show you are the financial guarantor." Helen's heart stopped. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "I think you're mistaken. I didn't sign anything." The representative paused. "Ma'am, the forms contain your signature and personal information." Helen sat heavily at her kitchen table. "When were these forms supposedly signed?" she asked, gripping the phone. On November 15th at 11:47 p.m. submitted electronically through our patient portal. Helen's mind raced. She knew exactly where she was at that time, driving through Utah in freezing wind, miles from cell service. "Email those forms to me," she said firmly. 20 minutes later, she opened the PDF. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone had signed her name, copied her address, even entered her social security number. And at the top of the page, it listed her as Eli's maternal grandmother. She wasn't. Helen immediately called the hospital. "This is Helen Brooks. Those forms are fraudulent." The representative's tone sharpened. "Fraudulent?" "Yes," Helen said. "I never signed these papers. I was driving across state lines when they were submitted. And I'm not the maternal grandmother. Please hold while I transfer you to our legal department." Helen's hands shook as she waited. She thought of every sweet-sounding call from Sarah inviting her to be at the birth, every polite lie, every reassuring message. When the legal team picked up, Helen explained everything: her drive, her location, the forged signature. She sent screenshots proving her whereabouts. The legal officer's voice turned firm. "Mrs. Brooks, this is a clear case of identity theft. We will be filing a fraud report immediately." Helen exhaled, part angry, part relieved. "Do what you need to do," she said. After hanging up, she sat at the table in silence. The humiliation, the rejection, the manipulation, now it all made sense. Sarah had pushed her away not out of emotion, but opportunity. She had wanted Helen gone so she could commit the fraud without interference. Then, as Helen stared at her phone, it buzzed with a new message from Michael. "Mom, we made it home. Eli's perfect." Helen stared at Michael's cheerful text, her fingers tightening around the phone. The message felt like salt on a wound. He had no idea that while he and Sarah were settling into their picture-perfect home, she was dealing with the fallout of a crime committed in her name. Helen typed a calm reply. "Glad everyone is healthy." She deleted everything else she wanted to say. Instead, she opened her laptop and created a folder labeled Fraud Evidence. She added screenshots, call logs, photos from her trip, and gas receipts with timestamps. If Sarah wanted to play dirty, Helen would play prepared. The next morning, Helen received another call, this time from a Denver police detective. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Detective Jenna Walsh. We've been assigned to investigate the fraud report connected to the hospital documents." Helen sat straighter. "I'm ready to help." "Good. We'll need a detailed timeline from you." For 45 minutes, Helen explained everything. Sarah's warm invitation, the 15-hour drive, Michael turning her away, the days of waiting, and finally the forged documents. "Do you have proof of your location the night the forms were submitted?" the detective asked. "Yes," Helen said. "I have screenshots, timestamps, and photos with GPS markers." "Excellent," Detective Walsh said. "Please send everything to this email. Based on what you've described, this appears deliberate, not accidental." Helen hung up and exhaled slowly. Deliberate. Hearing someone else confirm it made her chest tighten. Sarah hadn't just made a mistake. She had planned this. As Helen attached the files, she remembered the phone calls during her drive. Sarah's sweet voice, pretending to be excited for her arrival. Helen felt a cold realization settle over her. Sarah hadn't wanted her there at all. She had wanted her far away. Not for privacy, for cover. By afternoon, another knock came at Helen's door. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a blazer holding a folder. "Mrs. Brooks. I'm Dana Rivers with Denver Medical Center's fraud prevention team." Helen invited her in. Dana placed printed photos on the table. Security footage. These were taken at 11:52 p.m. on November 15th. Helen leaned forward. The image showed Sarah sitting at a computer in the hospital family lounge, typing rapidly. "These screenshots match the exact time the forms were submitted," Dana said. Helen's breath left her. She had been 4 hours away, lost in the Utah mountains, while Sarah used her identity. What happens next? Helen asked. Given the evidence, the hospital will pursue criminal charges. Identity theft related to medical fraud is a federal issue. The police and our legal team are moving forward. Helen nodded slowly. She felt no joy, no triumph, only a profound sadness that things had reached this point. After Dana left, Helen sat in silence, staring at the footage. Sarah hadn't looked panicked or confused. She looked focused, purposeful, like someone who had done this before. Helen whispered to herself. She wasn't afraid, she was comfortable. And that was the part that scared her most. That evening, Helen's phone buzzed again, this time Michael calling. She braced herself and answered. "Mom, what the hell happened?" he burst out. "The police came this morning. They arrested Sarah. They said you reported her." Helen closed her eyes. "I didn't report her, Michael. I reported fraud. The hospital discovered the rest." Silence hung between them. "What fraud?" he asked, sounding almost dazed. "The delivery bill, Michael. The one she tried to stick me with." Michael's voice cracked. "Mom, our insurance covered everything." Helen whispered. "No, sweetheart. It didn't." There was a long, shaky pause. "Sarah would never do something like that," Michael insisted. Helen almost pitied him. "Honey, they have video footage of her completing the forms. She used my name and information." Michael's breathing changed, fast and uneven. "There has to be a misunderstanding." In the background, Helen could hear baby Eli crying. "Michael," she said softly, "I know this is hard. But she forged my signature while telling me she couldn't wait for me to meet the baby." Michael's voice broke. "Why would she do that? Why would she push you away and then do all this?" Before Helen could answer, she heard another voice yelling faintly in the background. It was Sarah, angry, panicked, insisting she had made a mistake, that she thought she was signing something else. Michael choked out. "Sarah says it was just emergency contact forms." "Michael," Helen said gently but firmly, "I worked in medical billing for 30 years. I know exactly what those forms look like. She didn't make a mistake." There was quiet crying on the line. Helen couldn't tell if it was Michael or Sarah. "Mom," Michael whispered, "what's going to happen to her?" Helen answered softly. "The truth is, I don't know." After the call ended, Helen stood alone in her kitchen, gripping the counter. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had wanted to hold her grandson, celebrate his arrival, and be part of her son's joy. Instead, she had exposed a crime that might break her son's family apart. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Michael. "Please don't testify. Please don't make this worse." Helen stared at the message, stunned. After everything Sarah had done, Michael wanted her to stay silent, to protect the woman who'd betrayed them all. Helen typed back slowly, choosing every word with care. "Michael, I won't lie to protect anyone. Not even for you." She placed the phone face down. The house felt unbearably quiet. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the table, thinking about the years she had supported Michael. School fees, rent, groceries, emergencies. She had always showed up, always helped. And now he was asking her to protect a criminal. Helen whispered to herself, "No more." She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing with certainty. She wouldn't be bullied into silence. Not by anyone. The next morning, Helen woke up to another call, this time from Detective Jenna Walsh again. "Mrs. Brooks, we need a more detailed statement today. The investigation is expanding." Helen rubbed her temples. "Expanding how?" "Other victims are coming forward. We're uncovering a pattern in Sarah's behavior." Helen swallowed. "Other victims?" "Yes, family members, friends, people close to her. It appears the identity theft wasn't a one-time act." Helen sat straighter. Sarah had always felt off, but she'd never imagined this. "Detective," she said quietly, "tell me what you need." "Everything you remember," Walsh replied. "Even small details matter." Helen spent the next hour recounting every strange moment, every too-sweet phone call, every forced smile from Sarah. When she finished, Detective Walsh said, "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. There's something else. An investigator from the hospital will be visiting you again. We've uncovered strong evidence that this wasn't impulsive." Helen hung up, feeling a heaviness in her chest. She walked to her living room window and stared at the distant mountains. She sensed that something bigger was coming, something far beyond a fraudulent hospital bill. She whispered to herself, "What have you done, Sarah?" Not with anger this time, but with genuine fear. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Helen opened the door to see a different woman this time, a sharp-eyed investigator named Chloe Reed from the Federal Fraud Division. "Mrs. Brooks, may I come in?" Helen nodded and led her to the kitchen table. Chloe placed a thick folder on the table. "What I'm about to show you may be disturbing." Helen braced herself. Chloe opened the folder and slid out documents: credit card statements, bank applications, hospital forms, insurance claims. "These," Chloe said, "are all tied to your daughter-in-law. And every one of them lists a family member as guarantor or co-applicant." Helen stared at the pages, stunned. "Who are these people?" she asked. "Eric's cousin Josh. His sister Emily. Sarah's supposed brother. Even one of her co-workers." Helen felt her stomach twist. Did she steal from all of them? Chloe nodded. "Yes. And there's more." She placed another document in front of Helen. An employment record. Sarah used multiple names in applications. She's been involved in small-scale fraud for years. Most victims never realized what she did. Helen closed her eyes. Sarah had built her life on lies, and she had dragged Michael along without him ever noticing. Later that evening, Michael showed up at Helen's door. He looked exhausted, unshaven, and overwhelmed, carrying baby Eli in his car seat. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked quietly. Helen stepped aside to let them in. Michael placed Eli gently on the couch and sat down, running a hand through his hair. "They showed me the footage," he whispered. "They said there's more. Lot more. I don't recognize her." Helen sat beside him. "I know, sweetheart." Tears filled Michael's eyes. "She told me she loved you. She told me she wanted you there. Why would she do this to us?" Helen placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Because she wasn't thinking about us. She was thinking about herself." Michael shook his head slowly. "The detective said she researched my family before we ever met. She knew where you lived, how much you made. She knew everything." Helen inhaled sharply. "Why would she do that?" "They think it was planned," Michael whispered. "That Sarah targeted me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Helen felt everything inside her tilt. Targeted. Not chosen. Not loved. Chosen like prey. "Honey," she said gently, "whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The next morning, Helen received another unexpected call, this time from Agent Dana Rivers. "Mrs. Brooks, we've expanded the case to federal levels. We'll need your cooperation." Helen nodded, though the agent couldn't see her. "Whatever you need." "Good. We've discovered evidence that Sarah may have used your information before. Small things. Testing patterns. Trying to see if she could access your accounts." Helen felt cold. "How long?" "Possibly months," Dana said. She was preparing for a larger fraud. Helen leaned back in her chair, her hands trembling. "I let her into my home," she whispered. "I trusted her with everything." That afternoon, Helen gathered every document she had, old receipts, text messages, call logs, and arranged them neatly before Agent Rivers arrived. The agent went through each piece carefully. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "I need you to understand something. This wasn't personal. Sarah does this to everyone she sees as financially stable." Helen shook her head. "But she invited me to the birth. She made me drive all that way." "Yes," the agent replied. "Because you were far enough away that she could move freely. You were a perfect target, reachable, emotional, and trusting." Helen felt tears prick her eyes. "I feel foolish." "You're not foolish," Agent Rivers said softly. "You're kind. And people like Sarah know how to exploit kindness. Helen nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Agent Rivers. Is she going to prison? Most likely, the agent said. But there's more. We're following a trail that suggests Sarah wasn't working alone. Helen's heart stopped. Not alone. No. We believe she learned these techniques from someone else. Possibly a former partner. Helen gripped the table. A partner? Yes. Someone with experience in long-term fraud schemes. Someone who may still be active. Helen felt a chill creep up her spine. Who is this person? Agent Rivers hesitated before answering. His name is Tyler Grant. He's Sarah's ex-husband. Helen felt the room tilt. Ex-husband? Yes, Rivers said quietly. And based on documents we've gathered, we believe he trained her. Possibly even forced her into some of these crimes. Helen's voice trembled. Michael has no idea. No, the agent agreed. And he needs to know soon. Helen looked toward the living room where baby Eli slept peacefully in his carrier. She whispered almost to herself, what kind of danger were they in? Agent Rivers closed the folder. Mrs. Brooks, more danger than you realized. That evening, Helen sat with Michael in her living room, baby Eli sleeping in his carrier beside them. She chose her words carefully. Michael, there's something you need to know about Sarah. He looked up, exhausted. What now, Mom? I feel like every day I learn something worse. Helen hesitated. Her name isn't really Sarah. And she was married before. Michael frowned. She told me she'd never been married. Helen swallowed hard. Her ex-husband's name is Tyler Grant. Investigators believe he taught her everything. Identity theft, financial fraud. All of it. And they think he might still be involved. Michael leaned forward, hands on his face. Mom, I don't understand any of this. Why would she lie about her entire life? Because she needed a new start, Helen said softly. A clean record. A place where no one knew her history. Michael shook his head. So she used me. Helen placed a hand on his arm. Michael, you are not to blame. She could have married anyone. You were convenient, kind, stable. Tears filled Michael's eyes. I loved her, Mom. Helen nodded. I know. And she used that love as a tool. He whispered, I feel sick. 2 days later, federal agents contacted Helen again. This time they needed statements from Michael as well. He agreed reluctantly. At the station, Michael learned things that shattered whatever pieces of trust he still had left. Tyler Grant wasn't just a name. He was a criminal with a long history of deception. Helen saw Michael's hands shaking as an agent explained. Your wife, under Tyler's guidance, had researched your family long before you met. They intended to defraud every financially stable relative you had. Michael exhaled shakily. So none of it was real. Our life. Our marriage. The agent whispered. I'm sorry. That night, after putting Eli to sleep in the guest room, Michael broke down in Helen's kitchen. Mom, how do I raise my son knowing his mother built our whole life on lies? Helen wrapped her arms around him like she had when he was 5 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. One day at a time, she murmured. And with honesty. That's something Sarah never gave him. Michael whispered. Will he hate her? He'll understand, Helen replied softly. When he's older, you'll tell him the truth. Not the ugly details. Just enough to protect him. Michael nodded, tears dripping onto her shoulder. The trial came sooner than expected, drawing reporters, investigators, and curious observers. Helen attended each day, not out of anger but to see the truth laid out plainly. Sarah appeared in court looking smaller than Helen remembered, nervous, pale, avoiding Michael's eyes. The prosecutor presented documents, security footage, credit card trails, bank applications, and victim testimonies. At one point Sarah attempted to speak. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she cried. I was scared. Tyler forced. The judge cut her off. You submitted multiple fraudulent documents yourself. You acted alone in several cases. You continued the fraud long after leaving Tyler. When Michael took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He held Eli in his arms, the baby sleeping soundly. I believed everything she told me, Michael said quietly. I thought we were building a life together. I didn't know she was building a lie. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Michael, please. I loved you. Michael looked at her, heartbroken. No. You loved what you could take from me. Even the judge paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Helen felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Sarah's web of lies was finally unraveling in front of everyone. After 2 days of testimonies and evidence, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict aloud. On all counts of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. Sarah covered her face and sobbed. Michael held Eli tightly, whispering to him, "It's over now." Helen watched quietly. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt free. Free from manipulation. Free from guilt. Free from the weight of lies she hadn't asked to carry. She squeezed Michael's arm gently. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "For yourself and for Eli." At sentencing, the judge addressed Sarah directly. "You exploited trust. You manipulated family bonds. You stole identities and attempted to shift responsibility onto innocent relatives. You showed patterns of deception, not desperation." The judge sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison, with additional restitution to every victim. Helen felt Michael tense beside her. Sarah turned once more toward them. "Michael, please. Don't let Eli forget me." Michael lowered his gaze. "I'll tell him you made mistakes, but I won't raise him on lies." Sarah cried harder as officers led her away, her voice fading down the corridor. Outside the courthouse, Michael held Eli while reporters snapped photos at a distance. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't know what happens next." Helen touched Eli's tiny hand. "You start over," she said gently. "You build a life based on truth. And you let yourself heal." Michael nodded slowly. "Thank you for standing up when I didn't." Helen softened. "You were blinded by love, Michael. That's not a crime. But what she did was." He looked at her with watery eyes. "I'm glad Eli has you." She gave him a small smile. "I'll always be here for him." That evening, back at home, Helen sat on her porch holding Eli while the sun dipped behind the mountains. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the darkness he had escaped. Michael sat beside her, sipping tea, finally breathing without fear. Helen looked at her grandson's soft face and whispered, "You're safe now, little one. Safe from lies, safe from secrets, safe from people who tried to use you before you even learned to walk." Michael leaned against the railing, exhausted but hopeful. As the first stars appeared, Helen realized something powerful. What began as betrayal had created a new beginning. Their family, wounded but honest, would rise again.